This is not the way a world ends. It's the way an idea does.
There is a world where the West never rose. This is how it happened.
What if the map of your mind was erased? The ideas of democracy, human rights, and the scientific method, the very bedrock of our world, were not defeated in war, but simply deleted by a fever. This is the story of the Great Dying, the 12 years that silenced a continent and created a planet we would barely recognize. Welcome to Alternate Realities. The year is 1799. Europe is not just a continent, it's a catalyst. In Britain, James Watt's steam engine is reshaping reality itself. In France, Napoleon Bonaparte consolidates power, his armies a testament to human ambition. The air is thick with the ideas of Locke, Rousseau, and Newton. It is a civilization at its most confident, its most connected, and at its most vulnerable. But what if that connectivity was a trap? What happens when the very networks of trade and war that fuel an empire become the perfect delivery system for its own destruction? In the bustling ancient port of Constantinople, the Yersinia pestis bacterium makes a random, monstrous error in replication. This new strain, Pestis sanguis, the Crimson Death, is a perfect predator. It combines the pneumonic form's airborne transmission with a prolonged asymptomatic incubation period. A merchant, a soldier, a sailor could feel perfectly healthy for 2 weeks, spreading death in every crowded room they entered, only to collapse and bleed out internally in a matter of hours. We know this is possible. The 1918 Spanish flu had a mortality rate that devastated young, healthy adults. The Crimson Death is that principle, weaponized to its most extreme logical conclusion. The first cases in Vienna are misdiagnosed as a violent influenza. In London, doctors speak of a congestion of the humors. But within days, the truth is horrifyingly clear. The mortality rate is a staggering 90%. There is no immunity. Think about that number for a second. Look around a room of 10 people. In this plague, only one walks out. Society doesn't just bend under that pressure, it shatters. Napoleon's Grand Army, a force of over 200,000 men, becomes a marching necropolis. Supply lines break down. Orders cease to arrive. The complex machinery of European warfare and statehood grinds to a halt, not from enemy action, but from sheer biological attrition. By 1805, the mail coaches stop running. By 1807, the last coordinated government broadcasts, desperate, pleading bulletins, fall silent. The Enlightenment, the age of reason and light, ends not with a bang, but with a death rattle that echoes from Lisbon to Moscow. By 1810, the storm has passed. What remains? Paris, the city of lights, is dark. The Louvre stands as a vast, empty tomb for masterpieces no one is left to see. In Oxford, the Bodleian Library houses the sum of human knowledge, slowly mouldering in the damp, read only by the insects chewing on the parchment. What becomes of the human spirit when 9 out of 10 people vanish? The survivors aren't rebuilding a civilization, they are scavenging from its corpse. They form terrified, superstitious tribes, living in the shadow of skyscrapers they cannot comprehend, telling myths of the time before the cough. The world's former center of power has become its largest haunted house. While Europe dies, all eyes turn east to the Ottoman Empire. For a century, European diplomats had called it the sick man of Europe, but now the patient has outlived the doctors. While ravaged, the empire's more dispersed population centers and prior exposure to plagues gave it a crucial, if brutal, buffer. Constantinople becomes the nerve center of a new world. Sultan Selim III, the very reformer who was once deposed for modernizing too fast, now finds himself the master of the unforeseen. His first move is one of sheer survival, a brutal, total quarantine of the European border. His second move is reclamation. But how does an empire built on trade and conquest react when its primary trading partners and conquests are gone? The Ottomans didn't just lose a rival, they lost their economic ecosystem. So they did the only thing they could. They turned Europe itself into their new resource. Ottoman armies, clad in modernized uniforms and fearing the bad air, don protective masks and cautiously cross into the Balkans. They don't find armies, they find silence. They march into empty Vienna, not as triumphant conquerors, but as terrified archaeologists of a lost civilization. Their mission, not to occupy, but to extract. They strip museums of art to adorn the Sultan's palace. They loot universities of scientific texts, creating vast translation bureaus in Istanbul. They seize abandoned factories, dismantling them piece by piece to be shipped east and reassembled. Imagine the scene. An imam praying in the echoing vault of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, not as an act of conversion, but because the sheer scale of the empty city has driven his men mad with superstition. The Ottoman Empire becomes a scavenger caliphate, growing immensely powerful, yet forever psychologically haunted by the ghost-filled prize it has won. Across the Atlantic, the news arrived in fragments. First, rumors of a great sickness. Then, waves of ghost ships, vessels drifting into New York Harbor with every soul on board dead, their final logs speaking of cities aflame with fever. President Thomas Jefferson faced an impossible choice. The final decisive moment came with the arrival of the merchant ship Hope from Bristol. It carried 24 survivors, half of them already showing the telltale crimson blotches. The Hope was burned in the harbor, its survivors left to their fate on a quarantined island. It was a brutal, necessary act that would define the American psyche for centuries. The order was given: no ship from the Old World shall make landfall, by any means necessary. Can a nation founded on Enlightenment ideals survive by abandoning the land that spawned them? The United States was forced to make a devil's bargain, save the body of the nation by severing its connection to its own mind. Thus began the era of Fortress America. The Louisiana Purchase was no longer an expansion, it was a frantic consolidation, a desperate attempt to put distance between the coasts and the plague. The driving ideology shifted from manifest destiny to manifest survival. Without European competition, technology evolved in strange, hyper-pragmatic ways. Why invent the locomotive for cross-country trade when you're not trading with anyone? Instead, they perfected steam-powered riverine gunboats to patrol the Mississippi and massive, automated coastal artillery to deter the ghosts they feared would come from the sea. Their culture turned inward, paranoid and self-reliant to an extreme. They became the world's most armed, most technologically advanced, and most isolated hermit kingdom, viewing the Atlantic not as a highway, but as a moat filled with pestilence. Now, let's travel to the other side of the world, to an archipelago that heard only whispers of the apocalypse. In Japan, the Tokugawa Shogunate continued its policy of sakoku, isolation. But here's the fascinating twist. Without the threat of American gunboats, this isolation wasn't a stasis, it was an incubation. The limited knowledge trickling in through the Dutch trading post at Tajima was no longer a novelty. It was a puzzle to be solved and improved upon, free from Western pressure or imitation. Japanese artisans and thinkers, with their profound tradition of precision and refinement, began to reverse engineer and reinvent Western technology on their own terms. What does an industrial revolution look like when it's filtered through the sensibilities of a samurai? The answer is both beautiful and terrifying. Imagine a steam engine, not of grimy iron, but of lacquered wood and polished brass, silent and efficient. Imagine firearms that are also works of art, wielded by samurai who see their use as a new form of disciplined martial art. By the 1880s, Japan had quietly achieved a unique, self-sufficient industrialization. And then they looked outward. Not as pupils, but as masters. Their first ironclad, steam-powered exploration fleets, reminiscent of the ancient Wako pirate ships, crossed the Pacific. When they made landfall on the west coast of America, they found Fortress America, a bewildering, militarized society they could not comprehend. And when they finally sailed around the Cape and reached Europe, they found a green, silent wilderness. They anchored in the Thames estuary and sent samurai in refined, silent-running mechanical armor into the overgrown ruins of London. They weren't meeting kings or philosophers. They were cataloging flora and fauna and studying the crumbling architecture of a dead civilization as if it were a natural geological formation. The student had become the master, only to find the teacher's lecture hall empty and reclaimed by nature.
The future isn't always built on the past. Sometimes, it simply moves into its house.